Hello, my name is Greg Hammer, president of Hammer Financial Group. I'm looking forward to spending a few minutes here with you just as an introduction to what we'll refer to as tax management and what that means and why it's important to understand a little bit about it in your particular situation, especially when you look at income planning and distribution planning. So, what is tax management? I think the first thing that you need to kind of think about and understand is not all money is taxed equally. There are different types of accounts that have preferential treatment, some that are taxed when they go in, some that are taxed when they go out, some that are, deferred, some that are not. And the order in which you take money and do withdrawings is you begin to use the assets in the distribution phase will create different types of impacts. So the idea and concept around tax management is how do we continue to maximize our income with the specific efforts around minimizing your taxes. So that's what we're going to share a little bit with you today and talk a little bit about what I like to refer to as a lifetime tax burden. And the thing that really just to kind of understand here is you do not age out of taxes. Taxes are something that are going to exist in all phases. And we talk about three very distinct phases. One being your working years, the second being your retirement years, and then ultimately the transfer of assets at death being that third phase. And the simple fact of it is the more you make, the more you're generally going to have liability and the more you're probably going to pay in one of those phases. So what are the blueprints and what is tax management and why is it important? Well, for starters, I think it's important to understand that there's been a large growth in the IRS in terms of the amount of people that will be monitoring and looking at how you are doing on your taxes and your tax returns. They've added upwards of 87,000 IRS agents, and for most of us, taxes are the single largest expense in retirement. The thing to understand about tax preparation, that's not the management. Tax preparation is more about looking backwards. Let me give you just kind of a little bit of insight of it. So let's say that you were building a house or you were buying a house. Well, ultimately, before you complete the financing in either one of those scenarios, you're typically going to get an inspection. And what that inspection is, it's just going to look at everything that was already completed. What's the result of those efforts? So a tax preparer is more of the historian. They're going to be looking backwards. When you get your taxes done in the following year, you're not going to change the impact of those decisions in the new year. The results are going to be the results. So preparation is very important. It's very important to know where you're at and the types of tax liabilities that you have, but it's not something that we have discretion as to how that tax return is going to turn out. When we look at planning, it's more about, hey, what is our objective? What are our goals? So using the same analogy in a house is like, what is that type of house that we want? If we're going to build a house, you have to design it. So planning is more of a one-time event, as we like to call it. It's just making, a complex decision with all the relevant information. What are the things that we're not thinking about? How should the layout be constructed? How many rooms do we want? What type of bathrooms we want? What are the ultimate goals in our dream home, so to speak? And that's really about just understanding where it is I want to be and creating that blueprint. When we get into tax management, it's going to be more focused on how do we do that, right? How do we put the plans into action? The architect is not going to be the person that's going to build your house. Well, in investments, tax management is critical, and generally that's not going to be handled by a wealth advisor. There's usually two very distinct different paths. When you look at that, most wealth managers are going to be focused on performance, total return, where in tax management, it's going to be oversight on tax focused decisions like, how can we mitigate taxes? What are things that we need to do to provide value, not only in our working years, but more importantly in our retirement years, our distribution years, and then how are those decisions going to impact ultimately the legacy that we leave for our family, if that's important to us as well. So when you look at management, it's a very fluid process. What are those plans? Where do we need to adapt? What are the changes that we need to be? Constantly looking at things that happen. Once we have a home, how do we maintain it? How do we do the things to add to that value moving forward? What are the little additions that we might want to consider? How do we, keep enjoying the home the way we want? And those focused decisions allow us to continue to enjoy and maximize the value of the home. Well, that's very similar to what you'll want to do with your investment planning and, more importantly, your distribution planning. How do we create the most value of our assets? We spent the entirety of our life accumulating these assets, and we want to try to make sure that we're going to keep as much of it as possible and make it the most efficient distribution so that we get to realize the efforts that we put in all those years and capitalize on as much of the value of the investment as possible. So in that, we're talking very, very high view here, but the philosophy that I feel works very well is what we call our bucket plan philosophy. And this is really an asset positioning plan that helps us understand and identify and put purpose behind assets. And in that, it includes a lot of different things. It includes your investments, it includes tax management, retirement income plan, your insurance, Social Security, health care, what are some of our priorities for legacy? And just to kind of generalize it, there's three buckets that we talk about in the planning process. We call them the now, soon, and later buckets. The now bucket, very simply, is what are some of the things that we've identified as a planned expense? What are some of the things that we need in the next 12 months? What are the things that are the dollar amount that we like at arm's reach for emergency? And we just want to identify those assets and make sure that they're in a place that are readily available, very usable. We're not really concerned about making money. It's more about access, right, and use. The soon bucket is where you really want to begin the planning process, right? It's about what are the dollar amounts that we need to dedicate to satisfy what we call the income gap. The gap is the amount of money that we want for our lifestyle need between what we're already receiving, like Social Security, potential pension, potential income streams that are created from investments. What is the gap between what we're receiving and where we feel our lifestyle need is? And we want to make sure we have the assets ideally to plan for the next 10 years in that soon bucket, because here we're going to plan for market volatility. We're going to anticipate it, and we want these assets to have less volatility so we're not subject to things like sequence of return risk. And if you're not familiar with sequence of return risk, very relevant. You need to find out about it in terms of distribution planning. But in that bucket, we're going to take a different approach from not only a management standpoint, but what we're emphasizing here, a tax standpoint. Where and how and what assets should we use today, tomorrow, next month? Which ones should we defer? And what portion should we take? How should our income be constructed? Should it come from one spot, or should it come from a variety of the investments that we have? And which ones make more sense based on our objectives? The later bucket is where we're going to focus our growth, things to battle stuff like inflation, legacy planning. And while we'll plan for generational legacy, what we're primarily talking about in this particular instance is how do we plan for a surviving spouse? And again, the relevancy in taxes here is going from a joint file tax return as a widow to a single file tax return. And what's the impact of that? So in this planning process, it's about, okay, what are some of the things we need to understand? But more importantly, in the management process, in that journey, what are the things that we constantly need to be doing to make use of the current tax laws? What are some of the changes? So the tax management journey, it's what you keep is as important as what you make, right? And taxes are going to be typically the largest expense in retirement unless you plan ahead. One of the things we always mention is there's nothing intuitive whatsoever about the IRS tax code. So it's hard to find opportunities by just looking at a tax return. So the first step is just kind of getting things in order and developing those blueprints. That's what we call the plan. Go without a plan is just a wish. So once we understand some of the things that we can do moving forward that would create value, then it's about the management, right? Building the structure to match that vision, then rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. And that's typically where we find the value is having somebody that understands where those opportunities lie and understands the things that you can do to begin to minimize that lifetime tax burden that you have. So in that process, there's three things again. The path includes all of them. Preparation is that looking backwards, right? The actual design, the planning of that house is important to understand what our vision is and what is the best end result and what are some of the things that we need to do to create that result. But I will say the most significant part of this process to an optimal tax management plan is having somebody that understands how taxes work, understands the value of positioning assets, not only for purpose in terms of management, but for purpose in terms of taxes. Because the more you can mitigate and minimize that tax liability, the more value you're going to be able to bring to your overall plan. And the more you're going to be able to realize of those assets and enjoy those assets that you work so hard and diligently to accumulate. In this holistic process, and there's a lot of information we can make available to you on this, is understanding cause and effect. What we generally find is most people work in silos. They have somebody that they love and enjoy and that handles their investments. They have a different person that will handle their taxes, somebody entirely different that works with their Medicare, and somebody that works with their insurance, estate planning, and so forth. People understand some Social Security, but not everybody. People understand investments, but not how it impacts their taxes. People understand the taxes, but might not understand how it can impact things with IRMA, which is the potential to pay more for Medicare than you should based on how your tax return looks. So in this holistic process, instead of working in silos, it's more about a more cohesive, or what we call holistic plan, and understanding where the opportunities lie and also where the potential pitfalls are in your planning process. So what we would like to do is offer the opportunity, encouragement to set up any type of phone call that you would like, where we can discuss where you're at in your tax management journey, talk about potential opportunities, just kind of do a check-in as to what your situation is, and maybe identify a couple of things that you're not aware of, or it might just simply be identifying the fact that you are on the correct path. So please feel free to contact our office. The phone number here, 864-8266. It's a 219 area code. We are located in Schererville. You can contact me and say, hey, I'd like to just set up a phone call with Greg Hammer. And what you'll do is you'll get directed to my assistant, Jamie, and she'll schedule a time in my calendar. And we can just spend a few minutes, find out a little bit about what your situation is, what your concerns are, give you the opportunity to ask any questions about us, who we are, how our processes work, how we engage, and see if there's maybe some opportunity that we can look to do together moving forward. Appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully this was a little bit of insight as to some of the things that you may want to be aware of. And there's opportunity in tax management for most people, so please take advantage. Thank you so much.